August 21, 1942, the Tenaru River on Guadalcanal. In the pre-dawn darkness, Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki led 900 veteran Japanese soldiers toward what they believed would be an easy victory. These weren't inexperienced troops. They'd crushed Chinese forces 3 times their size. They'd been told the Americans were soft, that they'd panic in the dark, that their individualistic culture made them poor soldiers. Within hours, Ichiki and 800 of his men would be dead. The Marines had killed them almost to the last man, suffering just 35 casualties in return. This wasn't supposed to happen, not according to everything Japanese military intelligence had predicted about American forces. And yet, across every island in the Pacific, Japanese soldiers would learn the same brutal lesson. Fighting the United States Marines was unlike fighting any other enemy. It was unlike fighting the American Army. It was unlike anything their training had prepared them for. The Marines, they discovered, simply would not stop. They wouldn't retreat when surrounded. They wouldn't surrender when their position became hopeless. And most disturbing of all, they seemed to grow stronger and more determined the longer a battle raged. Today, we're exploring why Japanese soldiers came to fear and even hate fighting American Marines more than any other unit in the Second World War. We'll examine the battles that shattered Japanese confidence, the training that created such formidable warriors, and most importantly, we'll hear from Japanese soldiers themselves about what made the Marines so terrifying to face. This is a story about the collision of 2 warrior cultures, about the difference between spirit and spirit combined with industrial might, and about why one small branch of the American military earned a reputation that still resonates 8 decades later. The story begins on a steaming jungle island in the South Pacific, where American Marines would teach the Japanese Army its first lessons about underestimating their enemy. Guadalcanal, the first terrible lessons. On August 7, 1942, approximately 11,000 Marines of the 1st Marine Division stormed ashore on Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands. It was the first major American offensive in the Pacific. Japanese forces had occupied the island and were building an airfield that would threaten Allied supply lines to Australia. The Americans caught the defenders by surprise, quickly securing the airfield that would become Henderson Field. Japanese commanders, confident in their military superiority, immediately began planning to retake the island. They vastly underestimated the American presence. Intelligence reports described the Marines as elite troops, yes, but still Americans, products of a soft democratic society that valued individual comfort over collective sacrifice. They expected perhaps a few thousand troops who would likely withdraw when faced with determined Japanese resistance. The reality proved catastrophically different. When Colonel Ichiki's regiment attacked the Marine positions at the Tenaru River on August 21st, they walked into a meticulously prepared killing ground. The Marines had been warned of the attack through intelligence intercepts. They waited in defensive positions with interlocking fields of fire. When Ichiki's men waded into the river, in a classic night assault, expecting Americans to panic in the darkness, the Marines opened fire at point-blank range with automatic weapons and pre-registered artillery. The battle lasted about 20 minutes. Japanese casualties exceeded 700 killed on the spot. The survivors retreated in disorder, many dying in follow-up actions. The Marines had suffered 35 casualties. It was a ratio that shocked Japanese commanders. This wasn't how battles were supposed to go, not against supposedly soft American troops. But what happened next revealed something even more disturbing to Japanese observers. Rather than consolidate their defensive positions and rest, the Marines immediately counterattacked. They didn't wait for dawn. They didn't give the Japanese time to regroup. They pressed forward into the jungle, hunting down survivors, using night vision tactics that Japanese doctrine claimed only Asian troops mastered. Marine units moved through terrain the Japanese considered impenetrable, killed in silence, and vanished before Japanese reinforcements could respond. A Japanese officer who survived Guadalcanal later wrote in a diary intercepted by American intelligence, "We were taught the Americans are individualistic, that they will not sacrifice for their comrades. This is false. I watched a Marine machine gunner continue firing with both legs shattered until Japanese infantry killed him at arm's length. His assistant immediately took the weapon and continued firing. We lost 40 men to that position." The battles around Henderson Field throughout August, September, and October 1942 reinforced these initial impressions. Japanese forces repeatedly attacked, expecting Americans to break under pressure. The Marines held their ground, then counterattacked. When Japanese troops attempted traditional banzai charges that had broken Chinese and British forces, the Marines cut them down with disciplined automatic weapons fire and refused to panic. Night attacks that should have created chaos instead ran into Marines who seemed to welcome combat in darkness. By October, Japanese commanders had committed about 22,000 troops to retaking Henderson Field. The Marines, reinforced to about 23,000, defeated every attack. The final major Japanese offensive in late October saw waves of soldiers crash against Marine positions in desperate night assaults. The Americans held, inflicting thousands of casualties while taking hundreds. After this defeat, Japanese intelligence reports began describing Marines with a mixture of professional respect and genuine fear. One report captured on Saipan in 1944 noted, "American Marines undergo training that would be considered criminal abuse in any civilized army. They are broken down mentally and physically, then rebuilt into something that barely resembles the soft civilians who entered. They are taught to view death in combat as honorable, to never surrender, to fight until physically incapable." This sounds familiar. Yes, they have copied our Bushido, but added something we did not anticipate: American industrial capacity. This combination, warriors as willing to die as Japanese soldiers, backed by overwhelming material resources, would define every subsequent encounter between Marines and Japanese forces. The question wasn't whether the Marines would take an objective. The question was only how many casualties both sides would suffer in the process. The forging of a Marine. Training that produced warriors. To understand why Japanese soldiers feared Marines so distinctly, we need to examine how Marines were created. The transformation from civilian to Marine involved a training process that, in many ways, paralleled the harsh indoctrination of Japanese soldiers, but with critical differences that made Marines more adaptable and more lethal. Marine Corps boot camp during World War II lasted between 8 to 13 weeks, depending on the urgency of wartime needs. During this time, drill instructors systematically broke down everything civilian in a recruit. The process was physically brutal and psychologically intense. Recruits endured endless hours of close order drill, physical training at all hours of day and night, forced marches covering distances and speeds that seemed impossible, and constant psychological pressure designed to eliminate those who couldn't handle stress. The weapons training alone consumed over 140 hours, nearly half the entire training schedule. Marines learned to hit targets at ranges most infantry never attempted. They practiced with every weapon they might encounter: rifles, machine guns, grenades, bayonets, mortars. The emphasis on marksmanship was extraordinary. While Army training focused on adequate accuracy, Marine training demanded excellence. Every Marine qualified as a rifleman before anything else. This wasn't just training, it was indoctrination into a belief system where failure was unacceptable. But Marine training differed from Japanese military preparation in crucial ways. Where Japanese training emphasized obedience and collective action at the expense of individual initiative, Marine training created independent thinking warriors who could make decisions when officers fell. Squad leaders and even individual riflemen received authority to adapt to changing situations without waiting for orders from above. This decentralized decision-making would prove devastating in combat. When a Marine unit encountered unexpected resistance, sergeants immediately redirected the attack, called in supporting fire, and exploited weaknesses, all without waiting for a lieutenant or captain to assess the situation and issue new orders. The training also created an identity inseparable from the Corps itself. Unlike Army soldiers who might identify primarily with their specific unit or division, Marines internalized a belief that every Marine who ever lived was their brother. This psychological bond meant that failing in combat didn't just let down your immediate comrades, it betrayed every Marine throughout history. The pressure this created was immense, and it manifested in combat as an almost supernatural determination to complete objectives regardless of casualties. Japanese intelligence officers who interrogated Captured Marines reported their bewilderment at this mindset. One report noted that a prisoner explained boot camp as deliberately destroying everything civilian in a recruit, then building them into something new. You learn that you are part of something greater than yourself, that every Marine who ever lived is your brother. The interrogator added, "This created something unique. Marines fought because to fail was to betray every Marine who had ever lived. The psychological pressure created fighters who would advance when rational calculation said to stop. The physical conditioning was equally extreme. Marines trained to march at 7 miles per hour by alternating between running and fast walking. This was more than twice the normal infantry pace. They practiced amphibious assaults by climbing down cargo nets into small boats, then storming beaches under simulated fire. They learned to survive in harsh environments, to operate with minimal supplies, to keep fighting when exhausted, hungry, and terrified. The goal wasn't to create comfortable soldiers. The goal was to create warriors who thrived under conditions that would break ordinary men. When these highly trained, psychologically conditioned, and superbly equipped Marines hit Pacific beaches, Japanese defenders found themselves facing an enemy who matched their own warrior ethos while possessing vastly superior firepower and support. It was a combination that Japanese forces had no effective counter for. Tarawa, the Arithmetic of Unstoppable Determination, November 20th, 1943. Tarawa Atoll in the Gilbert Islands. Rear Admiral Keiji Shibasaki commanded 4,500 Japanese defenders in fortifications he considered impregnable. He famously boasted that 1,000,000 men could not take Tarawa in 100 years. The 2nd Marine Division proved him wrong in 76 hours, but the cost would shock both sides and reveal the essential difference between Marines and every other force Japanese soldiers had faced. The battle began badly for the Americans. Naval bombardment failed to destroy the network of concrete bunkers and fortified positions covering the beaches. When Marine landing craft approached the reef surrounding Betio Island, many grounded on unexpected coral outcroppings. Marines waded through hundreds of yards of chest-deep water under withering machine gun and artillery fire. The first waves were massacred. Bodies floated in the surf. The beach turned red with blood. Japanese gunners had perfect fields of fire, and they cut down Marines with devastating efficiency. This should have been where the attack stalled. This was the moment when rational military doctrine called for withdrawal and regrouping. The casualties were unsustainable. The Marines had no clear path forward. Japanese defenders could reasonably expect the Americans to pull back, replan, and return another day with a better approach. The Marines never considered retreating. More landing craft arrived, carrying more Marines who waded through the same killing ground. When those Marines died, more came behind them. The assault never paused. Within hours, despite catastrophic casualties, Marines had established small footholds on the beach. They brought forward flamethrowers and demolition charges. They began systematically destroying bunkers, paying for each position with lives, but never stopping, never slowing, never showing any sign that the horrific casualties were degrading their will to fight. Private First Class Tadashi Ogawa, one of only 17 Japanese survivors from Tarawa, later told interrogators what he witnessed. "The first wave was massacred in the water. We killed hundreds. More craft arrived. The second wave died on the beach. More came. The third wave reached our positions with flamethrowers. They did not stop until we were dead, or they were." The battle raged for 3 days and 3 nights. Marines suffered nearly 3,200 casualties, including over 1,000 killed, in just 76 hours of fighting. These were casualty rates that would have broken most military units. They would have forced commanders to halt offensive operations, to request reinforcements, to pause and reassess. The Marines reinforced and continued attacking without any reduction in intensity. Japanese defenders fought with equal courage, but they fought from fixed positions with limited ammunition and no reinforcement possible. Every casualty was permanent. Every round fired could not be replaced. The Marines fought from an expanding beachhead, with supplies arriving continuously. Casualties were evacuated and replaced. Ammunition was unlimited. The longer the battle lasted, the weaker Japanese defenders became, while Marine combat power actually increased. This mathematical reality that Marines could absorb casualties that would destroy other units and continue fighting terrified Japanese military planners. A captured intelligence document from 1944 noted, "Casualties inflicted on Marines do not degrade unit effectiveness until the unit is completely destroyed. Marines refuse orders to retreat and will counterattack even when tactically disadvantaged. This is unprecedented." The lesson of Tarawa spread throughout the Japanese military. Inflicting heavy casualties on Marines wouldn't stop them. Making an objective prohibitively expensive wouldn't deter them. The only way to stop Marines was to kill every single one of them, and they would kill